On this Wellness Wednesday this morning, we're going to talk more about the science and the mental health implications of seeing this graphic war imagery. University of Toronto professor of psychology, Steve Jordans, is joining us. Steve, really appreciate you being here. It's an important topic. In our line of work, you know, my social media feed is adjusted to see the news and reality of kind of what's going on in the world. So it's not perhaps as jarring for me when I see this, but, you know, for people who just, you know, use social media to keep in touch with friends and to kind of stay up to date on a little bit of things, what happens to someone's brain and mind when they constantly, their feeds are just kind of full of these images of war, very disturbing images?
Our brains are actually wired to look for threat. We have parts of our brain called our amygdala, and anytime we see input that's threatening, that puts us into a mode we call fight-flight mode. It's a very primitive mode that prepares you to deal with the threat. And so it energizes your body, fills your body with cortisol and adrenaline, gets you ready to go. And this is really the anxiety response. It's the same thing we call anxiety. And so every time you see one of those in your feed, it will trigger this response. And of course, the problem is these things just come up kind of randomly. You get hit with them. And the real problem is everyone's addicted to their social media. The current stats suggest every 10 minutes, young people check their phone. And so, you know, usually what we'd recommend is get away from it. Like, just have a small budget of watching things like that and then get away. But if you're looking at your phone every 10 minutes, you're not getting away. And that's where the real problem begins.
And I suppose the idea, too, is that if you're living it, if you're actually in the Middle East, in Israel, in the West Bank, in Gaza, etc., that fight or flight is an important thing because your body needs to know how to react. But if you're here looking at it through a screen, you know, from a distance, that can't be good for your body to constantly be going through this emotion and again, not knowing when it's going to be coming too.
100%. So exactly those things, you get hit by it when you're not expecting it, and you are sort of powerless. I mean, that reaction is to activate you to be able to do something. And when you can't do anything, you can start to run into a situation called learned helplessness, where you keep feeling like you want to do something, but you can't. And after a while, that can lead to this feeling of, I am helpless to do anything, and it can prevent people even from trying to do things when they have the opportunity. So that's sort of an added layer of it.
Interesting, isn't it? Because on the one hand, you know, we were speaking to somebody who is sort of stuck in Gaza right now, talking about the fact that social media is helping at least people see some of the reality on at least one side of what's happening there right now. But on the flip side, if you're here and you kind of start to feel helpless about what you can or in many cases can't do, that's traumatic as well here. But when it comes to social media, you talked about time restrictions. Is there kind of a healthy amount of time you can have, or right now is it dicey just based on what's
I think
floating
one
around?
way to think of it is to balance it, because just like there's things like this that put our brain and bodies in a negative state, singing, dancing, laughing, you know, going to a karaoke show, which doesn't seem sort of right when the world's like this, but that floods your body with positive hormones that can kind of counteract that force. And so, budget as much as you can, and you know, we'd say an hour or less if it was television sort of consumption. But then also try to make sure you're taking the time to kind of change the channel on your mind, to engage in activities that bring you to a better place.
And what if you don't recognize it? Like, what if you can't see it yourself, that perhaps you've been triggered or reacting in a certain way, but you don't necessarily know that maybe it is what you're watching on your feed?
I mean, that's a good point, because we don't appreciate often. And when I work with the police sometimes around issues of anxiety, one of the things we literally do is buddy up and play this game of a sort as you're learning about anxiety, where I would say to you, hey, Nick, you're anxious right now. And you would probably say, I am not, because your fight-flight is geared up. And then you go, oh, well, maybe I am. And so that is sort of a first step of learning to detect those feelings, which is just that, you know, energetic feeling of oxygen to your muscles, which is what it really is. And then learning some strategies of saying, oh, okay, I got to get away from this right now, and I got to go do something else. And that's sort of key to being able to manage some of that.
All right, listen, it's a really important conversation. Professor Steve Jordans from University of Toronto, thank you so much for joining us and sort of helping us work through this, you know, really difficult time from so many different facets. Thanks very much.
Nick.
Appreciate the time. All right, thank you.